All right, now both of my tote bag pieces are sewn with the corners and the tops are perfectly pressed. This next step might seem a little bit tricky, but it's definitely easier than sewing those corners up. What I am going to do is flip my bags so that the bottom seams face each other. That should be easy enough because there's only one bottom seam per each bag. And so what I want to do is make sure that all of my corners touch right here. So that edge and that edge. So when they are fully touching, I'm going to sew these two corners and these two corners together, just as they are. So I'm kind of pinching these already. I'll start off with these. When I sew these, I am going to sew them inside the seam allowance. So think about sewing them at 1/4 of an inch or 3/8 of an inch, something smaller than that 1/2 inch seam allowance. We can't go past this 1/2 inch seam allowance because that'll actually start sewing the interior of our tote bag, and we don't want to do that. We're just attaching at the seam allowance. So really just connecting those two together. I'm going to go ahead and turn my machine on. And I am stitching and back stitching this seam. So this is attaching the shell to the lining. This is a really important step because you definitely don't want to have a tote bag where the entire lining like pops out when you pull something out of your bag. This will ground it to the shell, so it'll stay really together as like one piece moving forward. Okay, so that is sewn, stitched and back stitched. I'm going to move on to the other side. Okay, just flip it around. Make sure you don't like get it twisted or anything. We really want those two bottom seams just to line up perfectly together like that. Okay, so my seam allowances are together. Put it together and stitching, back stitching. You can go over it a couple times if you're worried about them coming apart, but I don't really think they will. All right. Perfect. So now my bags, both my shell and my lining and facing are attached. What I'm going to do is I'll flip it so that the shell is facing me. I'm going to reach inside the shell. So I'm inside the shell. I am going to grab the bottom of the lining, grab onto it, and I'm just going to pull that shell around. Go ahead, kind of fluff it out with your hands, especially in the corners. My fabric is particularly thick, so it might need a little bit of finessing. And when I've done that, you can see I have a nice triangular corner. That looks great. Flip it around to this side. Yeah, this fabric is definitely got some body to it. It's definitely thicker, coarser. It's somewhere in between like a muslin and a canvas, which is actually really nice for sewing a tote bag. It's definitely sturdy. Okay. Fluff it out a little bit. And now I have my tote bag. Shell is completed. Inside, I have my lining joined to the facing. That looks really nice. I have clean corners, exactly sewn, just exactly the same as the outside, so they will all look like this nice triangular meeting of lining up with the seams. I really like this technique. I think it squares out the bottom of the bag quite nicely so it can kind of stand up on its own, especially with that bottom stitch line. So it's really coming together. Our last steps are the straps and attaching them, then closing up the top with a top stitch all the way around. So this is a beautiful, beautifully constructed tote bag that self-finishes, and we'll finish that in the next demo.